South Africa's future under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, is uncertain as the program's up for renewal in 2025. As a top beneficiary, the country relies on AGOA for tariff-free access to US markets, especially in agriculture, which exports over $7 billion. A Brookings Institution report warns that losing AGOA will have a small impact on the GDP, but hurt sectors like food, beverages and fruit. Provinces like the Western Cape, which accounts for nearly half of agricultural exports to the US, would be most affected. Well, joining us now is Yael Shafrir, Associate Partner at Weber Wenzel. Good afternoon and thank you for joining us. How would the loss of AGOA benefits affect South Africa's agricultural sector and key export industries?
Good afternoon. Let me perhaps make a correction.
Yes.
I'm Meluleki Nzimande. My colleague Yael was not able to make the interview.
Apologies for that. Apologies. But
not
continue. Thank you.
Yes. Look, maybe to start the conversation, the reciprocal tariffs, which President Trump of the US recently announced, may actually render this entire conversation academic, because as of today, the 9th of April, the 30% reciprocal tariff comes into effect, which might be an absolute barrier to trade between the US and South Africa.
Sorry to interject there. Can you clarify that? And that's a question that I've wanted an answer to for a while now.
Yes.
With the new tariffs, does the AGOA agreement fall away right from today?
That's a very good question.
Okay.
So the tariff, the reciprocal tariff, comes on top of all other tariffs that are in place.
Okay.
So what AGOA does is that in respect of the existing tariffs, you get the preferential access. So if AGOA wasn't there, you'd have, say, an example, a tariff of 10%, and then the new tariff of 30% would come on top of the 10%. And then to be 10 plus 30 gives you 40.
Sure.
What you have now is that that 10% in my example is zeroed by AGOA. So you still have the 30%. So it will be 0 plus 30%.
Gosh.
That said, as with many things in life, the devil is in the detail. There are some exemptions to the 30%. And it is important that traders look to see if their products are qualifying for exemption from the 30%. By way of example, avocados and beef are not listed in the list of goods that are subject to the 30% reciprocal tariff. And as it happens, they also benefit from AGOA. So for as long as AGOA remains in place until it expires on 30 September or at the end of September of this year, you still have those preferential arrangements available to you as a South African exporter. That said, there's no guarantee that AGOA is going to be renewed. If it is not renewed, then you'll be subject to the appropriate duty. I don't know, I don't have the exact number, but US duties have generally been low. And on that basis, for as long as the product is exempted from reciprocal tariffs and is subject to the relatively low duty, there are options that are available. The South African exporter, the US importer, and the consumer may then split the burden that arises because of the expiry of AGOA 3 ways, such that then trade continues.
Yes.
Alternatively, the South African supplier and the US importer can split the burden 2 ways, so that the US consumer experiences a net neutral impact on the duties. In that case, again, trade continues as usual. However, if, and this is an important issue in respect of products that are commodities, which are price sensitive, if it is not possible to absorb the duty and your product then becomes uncompetitive, either vis-a-vis domestic producers in the US or other suppliers to the US market, then you may lose that market.
What does the Brookings Institution report suggest about the broader economic impact on South Africa if AGOA benefits are lost?
Look, as you correctly said in your introduction, our exports to the US account for a very small, relatively small proportion of total imports into the US, but those that go under AGOA, their proportion as a relative of our exports is also quite small. So the Brookings Institution said that the net impact on the economy will be somewhere in the order of 0.06, I think, percent, if I'm not mistaken, which is not really significant, except for the companies that have heavy exposure to the US market, or provinces such as the Western Cape that have heavy exposure to the US market.
And lastly, and just quickly, what proactive measures could South Africa take to mitigate the potential effects of losing AGOA benefits?
Well, the first advice is sectors must look at the effects and analyze what applies to them and what doesn't apply to them. As I said, there are certain products that are excluded. So you need to look at that. And then secondly, work with your counterpart in the US to try and make out a plan. If that doesn't work, then look for alternative markets. It can be our neighbors here on the African continent.
Yes.
It can be other countries with whom we've got preferential trade agreements or territories such as the European Union and the UK with whom we've got an economic partnership agreements. Or it could be other territories with which we don't have preferential arrangements, but who want our products. The Middle East, China, and other countries, and Canada next door to the US, those territories. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Maluleke Nzimande, chatting to us there. And we'll be chatting to you again soon, I hope, on what happens if we fall out of the AGOA agreement.